Welcome to C2 Biz Growth Iron Sharpens Iron podcast, where CEOs and entrepreneurs share how they are overcoming business growth and sustainability challenges.
Welcome. I am your host, John Hale III, and we have an exciting program today. We are honored to have Tracye Turner visit us today. Tracye is Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Optimal Solutions Group and founder of Revelo Software, which is a COTS database management platform. And much more. We'll get into that here as we have a conversation. Welcome to the show, Tracye. How are you today?
Thanks for having me. I sound pretty important based on that introduction, but thank you.
Well, you are. You're doing some amazing things. And thank you. We see how you're showing up today, Executive Vice President of the Optimal Solutions Group and the founder of the Revelo Software company. But where we wanted to start off the conversation today was, what about in your early career or childhood started you on this journey that had the most significant impact as to how we see you today?
So my dad was a dentist, and he would pick us up after school, and we would hang out in his office and do our homework. And on his coffee table was Field and Stream and Black Enterprise. And so that was my after-school reading. And so I kept on going with the reading, and the next thing you know, I was selling the roses out of our garden and selling holiday magic for my mom to the neighbors. I had a wagon going up and down the street.
Fantastic. That it started from a young age. It's amazing just as parents and adults, the impact we can have on folks who just was reading and just sitting around. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Pretty zen.
Um,
I just want to say,
go ahead.
I can't say when I went to college, my parents wanted me to go into entrepreneurship. They said, be a teacher, which is great. And I had an economics professor who said, you guys need to get out there and think bigger. And I thought being an economist, he'd say, get a job. But he's like, no, you guys need to go out and start your own businesses. And so he was always hustling. He had different businesses going on. We'd run into him around campus and downtown. But he did make an impact on me.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing it. That is great news. It's great to hear. And so if you can describe what the Optimal Solutions Group does and just the evolution since its founding in 2000.
So this is our 25th year next month. And so we're really excited about that. Our whole thing about public policy research is every time you have an administration every 4 years, it takes 5 years to do the research. By the time the administration starts the research, the election cycle's over. So we just said, hey, everyone really needs real-time, data-driven, and evidence-based policy decision-making. So we started looking at streamlining processes in research, but then we said, hey, let's operationalize that in software. And that's really how we got Revelo started. But I'd say that it's been a really good run with Optimal. We're still going strong. We've done work in 24 countries. We've done national studies and charter schools and fatherhood programs, early reading, economic development, entrepreneurial ecosystems. It's been Homeland Security. So we've covered a lot of policy areas. And in all those years, no one's ever said, hey, something's wrong with your report. So that speaks a lot. People talk about integrity and they say they have it, but it's really what you do. And our reports have stood the test of time. So I'm proud of that.
Thank you. As well, you should be. Can you give us a sense of who the customers are that you have serviced over the years, over the first 25 years?
So our primary customers started out in state and local. We worked with the city of Baltimore, a lot of nonprofits. And then our first major customer was the U.S. Department of Education, a national charter school study. We moved into an HHS with another national study on healthy marriage, interventions for low-income couples, how to keep those couples together. As you know, two-income households have better outcomes if at all possible. And then we moved over into economic research, and we've done a lot of economic research in countries all across, I'd say, the continent of Africa. We've been South America, Eurasia. So that was pretty exciting. And our longest standing customer is Department of Education, the Small Business Administration. We've done quite a bit of work. I think, a lot of social policy programs are about helping people get on their feet. and entrepreneurship is a strong path. So we really like the work at SBA. So we studied programs helping women, veterans, hub zones, 8A programs, inner city mentorship. So Native Americans, we've really regional innovation clusters. I could go on and on, but I'd say we're really proud of that because that helps whole communities get on their feet.
Well, fantastic. Thank you for showing that. And it really seems like you have a huge, just an impact both here in the United States and throughout the world with the research that you've done for your clients. So thank you for sharing that. And you kind of hinted on this before, but how did Revelo software, the SaaS product suite, how did that evolve?
Mhm. Well, we were doing a lot of work in healthcare quality improvement right around the time of ACA. And I'd say that you need a lot of nurses, a lot of physicians to look at these medical records to see what's really working, what quality improvements can we make. Naturally, if you send a doctor to a house, that's very expensive but highly effective. So, what does a newsletter do? What do reminders do? Different healthcare incentive programs. And so we developed the software so that no matter how experienced the doctor or nurse or even health policy student were, that they'd have a decision system to guide them to their decisions about what's really working. So basically automating a decision system for them. Then we looked at the audits that healthcare was going on in fraud, waste, and abuse, looking at decisions made and claims and appeals. And that had a lot of regulations and policies and I just say agency and legislation, Supreme Court cases that you had to weave into your decisions. That was a lot for one
Hmm.
person to have to really know how to do. So we just created another decision system for them. And so it just kept going. Like everyone really needed a way to get a reliable decision system where it's transparent what the protocols were. So if you had to trace back to what the underlying logic is, you could do that. And so that's how we got Revelo started.
Well, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. So if I'm a healthcare provider and I'm using the software, it can really help me walk through the steps and from a regulatory standpoint, make sure I'm in line. And also from a decision-making best patient outcomes, excuse me, you could also make sure you're following those protocols, best practices as well.
Yes, that is true. And I'd say that, we'll get into this, but with the introduction of generative AI or large language models, we've actually just done another leapfrog in terms of embedding those kind of decision systems reliably into our software systems.
Great. Well, thank you for teasing that up because we're going to go there in a minute. But there's a couple of steps I wanted to cover first, and one was as you were growing and scaling the company, what were some of the biggest challenges that in the early days that you had to overcome that some CEOs listening might be able to learn from?
Mhm. I'd say in the early days, our first challenge was thinking about, okay, just dreaming big enough. We said, oh my gosh, if we could just get 1 million in revenue, and we didn't even stop to think, okay, well, we have staff to pay with the printer, the telecommunications costs. So we said, okay, 2 million. And we also learned that, spending time on a $50,000 proposal, you might as well make it a $500,000 proposal. So we're just thinking about scaling in those terms. Having a
Okay.
relationship with your banker for that growth
Mm-hmm.
is really helpful. And then having a community around you. So we were in an incubator, the Emerging Technology Center at Johns Hopkins University. So
Okay.
they're really instrumental in our growth. So having that support system, if we didn't have it, I don't know if we would have grown and scaled as we had done. The hurdles that we encountered, we were very fortunate that we had the support there to get us through them.
Okay, yeah, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that community and support that you had. And kind of teasing my next question is, how did you secure funding for the growth? You mentioned relationship with banks, and then as you look at Revelo as well, so kind of two two examples here, two companies in one in terms of from the optimal standpoint, and then now with the software coming with Revelo, how are you securing funding for both those companies?
I'm so glad you asked that question. Two different experiences entirely. So with Optimal in the early days, when you're a small business, you need collateral. It's your
Hmm.
credit, your collateral. And so we had to put our house up as collateral, which was,
Okay.
with three small kids, that wasn't exactly ideal for me, I'll tell you that. But there comes a point where you start to get the business in, and next thing you know, the bank says, hey, you don't have to do these personal guarantees anymore. And so that was a big relief. We worked with Harbor Bank. They were known for working with small businesses in the Baltimore area. That's where we got started. And that was tremendous. They gave us a $500,000 line of credit, and American Express had some very generous terms. And so we were able to grow from there. And by that point, we had enough revenues to self-sustain. Now, the journey with Revelo is a little bit different because here it is. Originally, we're building products for our customers under Revelo, but we said, hey, let's commercialize these. So you're building products that you don't necessarily have the customers for, but you have to put in the systematic ways that you can start up a subscription. How do they order? Do you integrate in something like Stripe? And how do they turn on their system and add users automatically without that support? So that takes money to set all of that up and get your sales funnel all set up. So that was a lot more of capital outlay than we didn't necessarily have the sales pipeline that we had the first time around. So we went out for several years and we kept pitching for venture capital. And I learned a lot about how scarce it is based on where you are and what your network is. So 2024, we did get our first round of seed funding, and we're really happy about that. TEDCO with the state of Maryland, they recognize that there was this gap in companies starting up and when they get to their later rounds of funding in this particular area in the state of Maryland. And so we're really fortunate. We're now going into raising funds for Series A and still at the same time doing the same things we did at Optimal, attending networking events, doing capability statements, doing proposals, making sure the website has search engine optimization and generative AI optimization, doing the social media. It's a lot less straightforward than the federal government work because before you just got a GSA schedule and you were qualified, you did capability statements, you bid on proposals. So it's a little bit different.
Right, right. And so it sounds like perhaps then as you're pursuing the funding sources, banks could understand that as you're winning contracts, they see that you have a revenue stream to be able to support the additional people, et cetera, that you need to grow, expand. So, okay, maybe you get a line of credit where with the generative AI and with the Revelo platform, you're investing R&D, time, sweat, blood, and tears into developing a product that you feel will solve the challenge, but you don't have a customer right there at that point in time.
Not all of them. So usually when we develop a product, we'll get one or two customers, get feedback, and then move on to starting to market it. And that's when you need salespeople and you have to spend money on ad dollars and that kind of thing. So typically speaking, when we have a product, we'll have one or two customers, but now we need to scale to have that ROI and also to make it profitable, because the startup costs are relatively high.
Right. Right. Well, thank you for sharing that. And it really speaks to the, just as a executive vice president and CEO and the founder of the software company, really just the dexterity you have to have of running and operating two different business models somewhat at the same time, if I understand you correctly.
Yes, that makes for long nights sometimes. So, but I really enjoyed. I liked the challenge. The uptake, I just wish we're working a little bit faster. So we're using a lot of our own agentic AI we've embedded to put out proposals. So instead of like one or two proposals a week, or even sometimes a month, we're putting out 5 to 10, which is pretty high volume to keep up with. But about 80% of it can be done through automation.
Gotcha. Thank you for sharing that because really in how you're using the technology and how you're investing that money back into the company to really make you more effective and efficient, that if you have a certain contract P win rate or contract win rate, the more proposals you put out that are still meet that same quality threshold you're going to bid on, the quicker you can get the proposals out, the more that you're going to win quicker.
And the sooner we learn. So, testing out our pricing, testing out our messaging, that's what's going on with a lot of these bulk proposals. We've shifted them to state and local. And then our next horizon is working with universities and commercial businesses. We just know the government market a little bit better, so we started there.
Yeah, thank you for that. It leads me right to my next question, which is how do you prioritize growth opportunities in terms of, because you've talked about developing a new product, right? In terms of the software, you talked about new markets from federal looking to state and local universities. So how do you prioritize just the growth opportunities with a finite amount of capital?
So we look at this in terms of a systems thinking approach. So we
Mhm.
have some longer term sales that we set in motion, and sometimes they take a year and a half, 2 years in advance. And so we start planting those seeds with uh, white papers and customer relationship building and demonstrations and
Mhm.
pilots. So that takes a while. We also developed e-commerce tools that are transactional. So if someone needs a particular type of service, and they're saying, "Hey, I need Section 508 remediation for a document," which is like making the document accessible for people with vision impairments.
Mhm.
Instead of
Excuse me.
them trying to get quotes, they just go to the website, they get a quote, they pick a vendor, and payments all right there. So that's everyday kind of small transactions, kind
Right.
of self-propelling. And then we have the intermediate products where they're pretty much turnkey. You can get the subscription, but maybe you have like a kickoff meeting, you have some training to show them how to use it, and that's like maybe a 1 to 2 month sales cycle. So we have 3 different sales cycles going on at the same time.
Thank you for sharing that. No, that is fantastic in terms of the diversity of products that you're offering the market. And for those of our listeners who may not understand, can you explain what Section 508 is?
Section 508 is under the American Disabilities Act, and it says that pretty much in by 2026, all state and local nonprofits, school districts, universities must have all of their public facing and internal facing content be accessible to users with vision impairments. Now, there's a benefit to organizations to have their documentation and their systems accessible because then they're machine readable. And once your content's machine readable, you can start to leverage the benefits of AI to start to do a lot of synthesis and do your work a lot faster. So there's a double benefit to meeting these Section 508 and Title II, they call it, guidelines for state and local.
Thank you for sharing that, Tracy. And it's really good to know that there's a benefit for doing the right thing.
Yes,
There's more than a
absolutely.
benefit if you leverage that. Thank you for sharing that. Um,
And I just want to share, John,
yeah,
that
go ahead.
it's in terms of getting content. I guess, ready for people with disabilities so they could consume it, there have been a lot of inventions. So Teams and all the conference software we have, a lot of things that were originally developed to accommodate people with these types of disabilities actually generally benefit the public eventually.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. No, that we all benefit. So thank you for
Mhm.
sharing that, and that is true. Thank you for sharing that. Can you give us an example of a bold move or a calculated risk that you took that paid off in scaling the company?
Hmm. I would say, one of our biggest risks early on with Optimal Solutions Group
Hmm.
was basically like leaving your job and, together as a married couple and having all these obligations. I think that was a big risk for us. And within a couple of years, things started to turn and we had done quite well. Um, Maybe by 2002, we were in operation. By 2005, we had 50 employees. So we grew rapidly.
Right.
And so, but it was risky and scary. In hindsight, it looks like it was easy, but those were really tough years. I remember you talked about capital. At one point, we had taken out home equity loans, and my father-in-law had loaned us some money, and so now we're like, oh, we're really on the hooks. So we got to make this happen.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And at this time, if I connected that in your comments earlier, so you have relatively three young kids at that point in time as well.
A 2-year-old, 8 and 9. And at that time, they were all in private school. So we had
Hmm.
that, and we had college tuition saved up for them because I
Hmm.
had a very successful career at Northrop Grumman. And
Hmm.
Mark had been a professor at Johns Hopkins University and at Georgetown. But we put all that savings aside for the kids. Next thing you know, we're tapping into that for this business, and you're like, oh my gosh, am I sacrificing my kids' education one day? So there were a lot of decisions going on back then.
Yes, 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 there were. But for those CEOs that are listening, it really goes into having faith in the business you started, and that it was really going to be different enough, distinct enough, um, to beat out the competition you had to actually win contracts. Because at the end of the day, I believe that's how winning the contracts is how you scaled quickly from yourselves up to 50 people in a couple of years.
We have a lot of barriers to entry. So typically most of our staff have graduate degrees, either PhDs or master's degrees, and X amount of years of experience in really kind of STEM fields and the sciences. And so we just knew once we got through there, there would be a higher barrier to entry that is just going to be something that could be commoditized.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that. No, thank you for sharing that. How you overcame some of those initial struggles there, and that probably really helps you as well as you look at Revelo and scaling that company, being able to leverage the experiences of the first company, just the barriers you had to get to be able to overcome, rather, to be able to scale the company.
It is a place I can look back to and say, okay, I did it before, and now I know what I'm doing, and so I should be able to pull this off. And so I think for us, it's like, okay, you just want it to happen sooner, just because, technology moves in quick cycles. And so you want to keep your products enhanced and updated, just like we've recently embedded agentic AI into them. And that was like a revamp. A lot of VCs have a huge portfolio of software companies that may become obsolete because of what agentic AI can do. And so we want to be ahead of that curve.
Well, thank you very much. That drives us to the next series of questions, a part of the conversation I'd love to have. We've touched on about technology. So clearly, technology has played an incredibly important role in the optimal solutions, and obviously from a Revelo standpoint. So can you talk to us about going from the SaaS product kind of that you mentioned, then touch on now this with the generative AI, how you came about to use it. You said you're using your own generative AI product, I believe, if I understood correctly, that you're growing. So if you could talk about that and how that's just changing your company and your business.
So we've been using AI and predictive analysis since 2007. It wasn't very glamorous. People thought it was some kind of black box, and so they were not very trusting of it. So we made sure that we said, okay, we can cite our data sources, the time of the date stamp of the date, and all of that, and then who touched the data, who transformed it. So we knew that was really important to users, even when we were preceding the whole large language model kind of developments recently. And so when agentic AI came out, or generative AI first, we said, okay, those same rules apply. The same National Institute of Standards, FedRAMP, risk kind of models still apply. They still need to know who signed in, what's the password complexity, does the system sign out, has the data been corrupted, all of that stuff still matters even more. So we actually saw an opportunity there. So we just needed to embed it into the workflows so that users could have choices. I could get an automated kind of review where I can get a traditional decision system that tells me what the right answer is based on the rules that we discussed earlier. Or AI can read the rules and tell me, okay, based on what you have as your content or your data you're reviewing, this is what we think you should do. Or you don't have any humans at all, and the AI says, I'm going to run all the algorithms all the way through with all these different agents working in parallel with each other and give an output, but still be able to say, this is the corpus or the boundary. This is where all these answers came from, to reduce the hallucinations. The biggest challenge is as these LLMs get bigger and more powerful, they hallucinate more. Now you can up your subscription and change your settings to be more precise, but really the opportunity for most businesses in the United States, even if you're Deloitte, is to train these models with your knowledge and expertise so that they're aids and they help you in your decision making. They're aids in your work. They're not necessarily replacing people, but they can allow us to be a lot more productive at this point. I can't say what the future holds. I've seen some pretty scary predictions about white collar workers and a lot of workers losing their jobs. But the prediction also is, I think I saw Robert Smith say, those who leverage it should do well, and those who are highly skilled should do well with AI as their aid.
Thank you for sharing that. And can you explain to us what LLM is, that acronym, and then
Sure.
what exactly is for our listeners who may not be familiar with it?
Even the experts say, what is generative AI? And so large language models are basically billions of calculations or parameters. And the more parameters you have, the more you can be able to put together different connections of data in ways that people don't understand. They call it neural learning or deep networks, and connections are made that even the coders didn't really code themselves, but the computer's almost self-learning. So that's what they call large language models, and it can do a lot of natural language processing off of language. And so the more parameters, the more data. They say, yeah, they've eaten up a lot of the data, these large language models, and now they just need to get more and more information and data that's, to learn from. But really the learning now is taking place at a finer tune level. So people training the models are helping the large language models to do better work and be more accurate.
Thank you. And you touched on this before, but could you go back and maybe take it a step further about how, from an optimal solution standpoint, you're actually using it internally for proposals, but how are you using generative AI to become just a better firm for your customers?
So I could say in several different ways, but the important part is that we don't commingle any sensitive data with these generative AI models. And so if a customer is going to use our system, it's going to be watermarked, and they're going to know this is a generative AI product. Do not enter any sensitive information unless you want to. And so that's very important. So,
Hmm.
so we use public data when we're doing our analyses, non-sensitive data. And so, for instance, proposals. It's an RFP that's publicly released, and our past performance is in a database, and our bios and resumes, our infrastructure, and our methodological approaches we largely craft, but with the aid sometimes of generative AI. So that's an area that we can actually mass produce proposals. Well, in that course of mass producing proposals, we started to develop a schema of the bots working together, coordinating, assembling, QCing, and outputting. Kind of like, you know, a bunch of robots down the assembly line doing a job, but without any humans. And we said, okay, wow. Well, what about the people receiving these proposals? Couldn't they benefit from being able to have something in seconds review the proposals? I'm sure the funders want to get their money out and award their contracts. So how about we build some tools for them so they can assess these proposals really quickly and still have a way to QC through human reviews that these assessments are accurate. So that's when we started to create tools that we said, okay, this is not sensitive information, and or we can anonymize the information. So in your system, you have the PII, which is your system personally identifiable information in the Revelo system. And another window, you have the generative AI. And so you do your synthesis, but you extract out the information, you get it analyzed, you put it back in, but it doesn't have the identifiers that make it, risky to have that into another system. So, but we're really careful. We follow the whole NIST FedRAMP safeguards that are out there. Now, I did want to say there's some interesting things going on with legislation around AI. Everybody wants safe AI to guard their civil liberties, their privacy, their rights. A lot of that has to do at a level of, the same things you have to do for social media and marketing and all the large companies. Those protections have to be made. However, I think that everyone agrees that as a country, we need to accelerate our pace because other countries, even ones with lesser resources, are going to start using these tools. In order for us to just stay ahead of the game, we need to be using them. So we do it as safely as possible. We do let our clients know if they're using a generative AI product. Sometimes I'm doing a demonstration and the clients say, I don't even want the traditional AI. I just want the synthesis from the generative AI, and they know all of the risks. And they say, I'm willing to accept because you guys can show me where the documentation came from. You can retrace all the decisions that came out of it. So I just want the generative AI.
No, thank you for sharing that. And as you're growing and scaling your company, how do we prevent, if I'm just submitting proposals, that I can really technically deliver the work and I don't have some really good generative AI engineers or people that are well equipped that can just do the proposal for me? And I'm not a doctor or I'm not a lawyer, but I'm delivering these proposals in my company. It looks like I have this capability. How do we prevent that from happening? Where I can just misrepresent what I'm doing, or just overstate just the expertise I have.
So I was approached just 2 days ago from a contractor who said, hey, there's a chief technology officer in the state government, and it's happening in federal where they're getting proposals that look exactly alike. Maybe they're using the same AI company. There are companies that take AI and they give them the language. And so I told them, I said, we actually have AI to detect AI. So if you get a proposal that has like a lot of dashes and periods that don't have completed sentences, fonts that look kind of quirky, those are signs of AI. Having it in and of itself is not a bad thing, as long as you have validatable information, if that's a word. So your staff, they have certain certifications and skills and years of experience that you can confirm, right? Your past performances sit in a past performance registry at an agency. You have an approved accounting system. AI can't approve your accounting system. That comes from another government agency. So those core parts that they want to score you on, I think it's perfectly fine to use AI to compile them and tell that story. But if you're going to compile a story that of something you cannot perform, this is not your technical approach, you don't have the skills or the staff or the understanding, then that is not a good use. There are tools out there, including ours, that can help contracting officers detect that. And I do think there's going to be a trend where state and local governments are going to be inundated with work that they normally didn't do. So emergency response is something being talked about, pushed to the states, education, some other things. They're going to be the ones putting out the grants or facilitating the grant decisions. And so being able to do that in a shorter period of time, I think this is an excellent use case that they can use AI to work on those kind of problems and challenges.
So it sounds like this is a business development tool for you as well.
It is. It really, there were several tools that we were developing. One was we talked about accessibility, testing for websites and documents. We do comments processing. If there's a law that's coming out and a public rule, having the public comment can take months. And so now we can
Right.
do that in seconds, right? So we have a tool for that. Everything that was around public policy research that Optimal had started. We talked about clinical quality healthcare improvement. And then we just kind of moved into, we're building these proposals for Revelo, and we had built the schema for all these agents. And then we said, you know what? The underlying key to this is sourcing your data, the security in the system, and cataloging your data correctly. If you give AI a book to read and you say, based on these requirements, write a proposal, it's going to get confused. So cataloging your information in really small segments so that it's consumable and templated and standardized for AI to use is key for the agencies and companies. So Revelo does a lot of that upfront tagging and coding and harmonization of your data. So we still see opportunities in doing that. And
Fantastic.
one other recent tool, because I know you came from the OSDBU office at Department of Energy, is that we said, you know what, procurement and acquisition officials spend a lot of time with thousands of small businesses. How about the agencies be able to do their market research based on information in their existing systems? How about they be able to assess vendor readiness instead of, so I'm walking up to you, I have my capability statement, just ingest those capability statements and give that company a score and guidance on how you can be ready to do business with this agency. And then for the contractors, we're always looking at procurement forecasts, who's going to do what when the budget came out, and they're all over different sites. So we consolidated and harmonized all of that. It's all in one place. You just ask the bot, hey, what's Department of Energy doing for small businesses and, I don't know, meeting planning this year, and get all those opportunities. Well, what are the upcoming expiring contracts? Let me get ahead of the forecast, which is just for this year, what's coming out next year. And so we put all those tools into a platform called Acquisition AI. And we think that all of us, whether the contracts people, the program office, or the contractors, will have to spend a lot less time writing proposals and reading proposals and scoring them.
That is for sure. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. What's a common mistake that you see other companies make when they're trying to scale their business?
Well, I'd say that a lot of times, it depends on the kind of business you're in. So if you're in manufacturing, you're going to have to spend a lot of money before you're going to see any revenue. Biotech, 7 to 10 years before you turn a profit. And so that's why I think in the state of Maryland, we have this ecosystem to help those companies and fund those companies until they can get where they need to go. I just attended an event looking at emerging technologies, particularly quantum computing and artificial intelligence. I participated on the panel. And so quantum computing, in terms of applicable uses, is about 5 to 7 years out, but the investment has to be made now. There are about 7 hubs worldwide. And if we don't make the investment now, if we decide to do it later, it'll be too late. So we really need to make that happen. One of our panelists was already producing quantum devices that are can be used today. So it's already happening. So I would say having the support and an ecosystem around those kind of investments are really important. And so I would just say that's the most important aspect, that you have that support system if it's a long-term investment. And then for the other firms that don't have that upfront investment, I just say just find your revenue model as soon as you can, right away. And I heard the death of a company is when you get a big fancy headquarters, that usually signals the decline of a company because everyone gets comfortable. So keep your edge.
That's so true. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that. And what is the next hill to climb for you as an individual, as an executive vice president, COO, and for both of the company?
I'd say for Optimal, having it adjust to this new world of lots of information and having validated information come out and get the attention of the public. That is what we want for Optimal. And for public policy research to succeed, regardless of whatever the side of the aisle is. Everyone wants to know what the facts are, right? And then for Revelo, we need to scale quickly and get the word out. I think that there's so many companies that are AI companies saying, I can do this, I can do that. Well, we have enterprise AI that people can collaborate in and rely on and follow the security procedures and accessibility kind of conformance laws. And so just getting the word out. And I thank you for this opportunity to do that right here today.
No, thank you very much for sharing that, and the fact that you've been using AI since 2007. You're not, this is, flavor of the month, and I slapped AI on our website and a couple products, and I hired an engineer or two. Now I'm doing AI. You've actually been doing this to drive your research and your work and your deliverables for your clients since 2007. And as you said, next month is 25 years in business, so you're clearly doing a lot of things right. That's for sure.
Hope so. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Well, Tracye, we wanted to thank you for joining us today on the C2 Biz Growth Iron Sharpens Iron podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, LinkedIn, Spotify, the cornerstonegroup.us website, and other locations. We invite you to listen, subscribe, and share. See you next time.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed being here.
Thank you for listening to the C2 Biz Growth Iron Sharpens Iron podcast. And check us out on social media, share, and subscribe.